I was listening to a former Air Force pilot talk once about landing a plane. He said, what you want to do is you want to watch the smaller houses become bigger houses when you're landing. If you don't see that, if the smaller houses don't become bigger, then something has gone wrong. Now that we've spent some time giving an overview or 30,000-foot view, it's time to get more practical knowledge that you can use. We need to make the small houses become big houses. In this class, we will work on some basic financial education that you can use for your plan. The first thing is finding your risk tolerance. As I mentioned in the earlier class, this is often done through a risk tolerance questionnaire. Many examples of these can be found online. These questionnaires ask you a series of questions to help you determine your risk level. These questionnaires ask you a series of questions to help you determine the risk level that you're comfortable taking. These questionnaires are important, and we use them with our clients, but they have some limitations. The first limitation is that they are usually only focused on a hypothetical investment into traditional markets. And they don't take into account other forms of investing risk, like investing into your own business or real estate rentals. The second thing is they do not invoke the emotions you feel during a potential loss, and therefore do not help you know how you would react in that situation. It is impossible to duplicate these feelings without truly going through them. But I have found that visualizing these events and walking through them can really help you. For example, let's say you were looking at investing in a stock portfolio that is similar to Standard & Poor's 500 index. Although past performance is no guarantee of future results, you could look up that history of that index and realize that the worst calendar year since 1950 was negative 39% in 2008. Then you could think about what amount of your long-term investments that you're planning on investing that you're willing to have go down reasonably by that much. Let's use an example. Let's pretend that you're investing $100,000. So start to imagine yourself investing $100,000, and a few months later, you open up a statement, and it shows you that you have $61,000, which is a 39% loss. How would that make you feel to lose those hard-earned dollars? Would you sell out of your investment and go against your financial plan? Would you keep a long-term focus? We all react differently, but going through this can help you understand how much risk you're willing to take. Another example, let's say you want to invest $100,000 into a business. And when you start that business, it ends up failing. In that case, you would have $0 left. And you may even be leveraged and owe money. How would that make you feel? Would you shrug it off and say, I gave it my best shot. It didn't work. It's all upward and onward from here. Or would this emotionally crush you? You also have to look at the upside in each of these scenarios to help you decide how much risk you can take for that potential reward. You can never predict the risk of any investment or the potential return, but you can try to put reasonable assumptions based upon the investment to help you make an educated decision with the facts you have. The key for risk tolerance is to visualize the pain and try to figure out your threshold. Once you determine it, it can help you decide what is in your best interest. The second thing you should consider is what is your cash flow and what are your future cash flows. This is a fancy way of saying you need to find out what the income you have coming in is versus the expenses you have that take resources away from you. This is often that step that people do not want to do, or they don't devote enough attention to the matter. As a planner, it is one of the key parts of building a client's plan. People will often forget to account for some things when doing this work. Some examples are annual memberships. For me, I belong to a lot of clubs and organizations that have smaller annual fees that can often seem trivial at the time, but when accounted for can really add up. For example, I belong to Sam's Club. It's charged every year, and it's usually added to my bill while I'm shopping, so it can be very easy for me to overlook this cost. Also, we forget to amortize out long-term expenditures. This is often the case with replacing a computer, getting a new vehicle, or home maintenance. You may only have to spend a lot of money fixing things in your house every few years, but you should account for that expense every year in your cash flows. Another thing that gets overlooked is forced savings, such as automatic contributions to your retirement plan or savings accounts. Once you get a good accounting of all these, you will need to project them out into the future. Which ones will go away, such as debt that is decreasing or activities you'll no longer do? Which ones will increase, like, for example, buying a boat or a motorcycle or childcare? It's also important to project out your income increases. You will then need to assume an inflation rate, which we'll talk about in a later class. That inflation tends to increase the expenses yearly. Then you will need to think about your long-term goals that may affect these expenses, such as buying a second home, having children, paying for health care, or retiring. Lastly, you will need to determine how to replace income sources as they change over time. For example, if you retire, where will you draw income from and how? Another example is, when will Social Security income kick in? Once you understand these cash flows, you can then understand the amount of resources you have to invest or apply to these goals and determine if that's enough to get you to where you want to be. The next thing to consider is debt. There are so many opinions on debt. Some say all debt is bad. Some say there are good debt and bad debt. Some people believe you should pay off low-interest debt with a higher returning investment. And some people say you should not, because over the long haul, the math says you could have more money by keeping a higher returning investment and a low-interest debt. My approach to debt is there is no black and white answer. It depends on your goals, your personality, and your resources. Approaching debt is similar to risk tolerance. Are you willing to take the risk that debt causes? First, debt limits your financial freedom. Second, it reduces your current cash flows. Third, it erodes your wealth building potential. Lastly, debt can cause problems when you experience financial hardships, and you can no longer pay that debt obligation. However, debt can enable you to grow your business, buy a house, and allow you to receive the benefits of something sooner than you would. Also, if you've done proper financial planning, you may be able to weather financial storms and still meet these financial obligations that debt burden causes. Debt can cause anxiety, stress, and fear. I recommend that you only take on debt after carefully considering the pros and cons, and only to better your financial life. I recommend staying away from debt to buy things today with tomorrow's dollars. Also, it's prudent most of the time to stay away from credit card debt, as this is often used to buy things you want instead of things you need, and often has a high interest rate associated with it. It's also important to be careful of 0% interest or similar offers that are used as a ploy to get you to buy something you can't afford and typically will not be paid off under the terms you agreed to get that low interest. However, if you have money set aside, earning interest, and you're careful to pay attention to the fine print, you can use this to your advantage. The key with debt is to understand the consequences and determine your personality and your situation and use it wisely and sparingly. The next thing to understand is emergency cash. The average emergency expense is $3,500 according to a Bankrate.com survey. You need money to cover emergency expenses. However, you also need money to cover your monthly cash flow in case you run into a financial hardship. You should have enough cash on hand to be able to go without work for 3 to 6 months based upon your goals. You should also keep enough cash to cover your short-term goals that are less than 24 months in length. Let's use an example. Let's say you make $100,000 a year. We know with that $100,000 a year, some of it's going to go to taxes. In this scenario, let's say it's 15% of taxes. Or in other words, $15,000. And let's say 10% goes into your long-term savings. So that's another $10,000. And let's say 5% goes into your short-term savings, which is another $5,000. In this scenario, this means you're realistically living on $70,000 per year. That means if we're trying to keep 3 to 6 months of living expenses, that this person should have between $17,500 and $35,000 to get them to that 3 to 6 months of living expenses. This will help them to be able to weather most financial storms. However, they should plan to keep any short-term expenses in cash. So let's say, for example, this client plans to buy a boat in the next 24 months. And let's say that boat is going to cost $10,000. Well, that's a short-term expense. So they'll want to keep an additional $10,000 on top of the $17,500 to $35,000 goal. Now I know this probably seems improbable if you're not there. So how do you achieve to get to this 3 to 6 months plus your short-term expenses if you're not there? In the words of Bill Murray and his great work, Something About Bob, baby steps. You can eat an elephant if you start one bite at a time. You need to start small and work your way there. If you are not there though, you should look for ways to reduce some of your cash flow and reduce some of your goals to help you get there faster. Also, you may want to pull back on some of your long-term savings to get you there quicker. Now, you will lose long-term compounding potential of these savings, but the negative effect of not doing this could be worse if you hit that financial storm and you have no cash savings. So this might be a trade-off you're willing to make. This brings us to the next consideration, which is the long-term compounding effect. One of the hardest parts of your financial plan is that there is not an overnight fix. It will typically take you a long time to accumulate wealth. And that's why we recommend it starting with your BHAGs, or big, hairy, audacious goals in our prior class. And then looking at what you can do to get there today. I personally am a marathon runner. A few years ago, Doug Smith, the founder of L3 Leadership, challenged me to run a half marathon to raise money for Light of Life rescue mission. Anyone that knew me up until that point in my life would have never thought I was capable of running a 5K, let alone a marathon. Several years later, because of creating a plan and working on it constantly, I've been able to compound my work to run multiple marathons in the same month and even run ultra marathons. It did not happen overnight. It took lots of consistency over time. One of my favorite quotes comes from Doug's high school football coach, Jim Rankin, that is paraphrased as, "It takes day-to-day intensity, week-to-week consistency, that month-to-month will lead to championships." When you grow your money, you can take advantage of long-term compounding. Another way to think of it is you can only make so much money off your own sweat. We all have the same 168 hours in a week. To increase your productivity and to make more, you need more people. They can then work for you and can increase your productivity output. With your money, when it makes interest, think of it as having children. Your money's children will then work just as hard as the parents. Let's use an example. Let's say you were to invest $100 a month. And let's say you did this starting at age 25. By the time you reached age 65, you would have invested $48,000. And let's say it was earning a 6% compounded interest. It would be worth over $200,000 by the time you reach age 65. Your money created more money through compounding interest. The problem with compounding is it needs time to maximize the results. So let's say you started saving $200 a month, which is double the amount, but you waited to age 40. Over this time period, you would have invested $60,000, which is more than the $48,000, but it would have grown only to $139,000. You would have invested $12,000 more, but you would have $61,000 less. It's important to look at compounding using a reasonable assumption for the types of investments you plan to have, and reasonable savings amounts that you're going to be able to save as part of your plan. Please note, these are hypothetical examples, are for illustration purposes only, and are not intended to be representative of actual results of any specific investment. Keep in mind that it is possible to lose money by investing, and actual results will vary. The next thing to take into consideration is protection. If you have a plan, one thing is almost certain. Something will come up to make you have to revise your plan. Some of these things we can plan for, but some we cannot. It's important to protect against the risks to your plan. This would not be things that we have planned for that we will talk about later, like inflation, taxes, or lower than expected returns. The risks we're talking about here, and the most common risks that we're referring to, are lawsuits, premature death, and a disability. To protect against these, you should understand the results of these risks and what damage it could cost your plan. Then, once you understand that, you will have to make the decision of how much you're willing to take from your cash flow and to fund other goals to protect against these risks for your plan. An example is with a disability. Let's say you have 2 job offers. The first job offer is you can make $100,000 a year. And if you get disabled, you're going to get nothing. But the second one, let's say you can make $90,000 a year. But if you're disabled, you could make $54,000 a year during disability instead of 0 like the other job. Which one would you take? Well, it depends on your personal goals, your personal situation, and your personality. But this is a way to think about protecting against risks. When you think about it taking away from your potential to use for other goals. This is a lot of times when we look at, does a disability policy make sense? Whatever the cost is, you can subtract it from the income, And you can view it this way to help you make that decision. The same holds true for life insurance to protect against a premature death, and liability insurance with your home and auto that can protect against certain lawsuits. The next consideration are your estate documents. I believe that anyone that's over the age of 18 should have a proper will, living will, and power of attorney documents. Now please note that I am not an attorney, and the following is for educational purposes only. Please discuss your own personal situation with a licensed attorney. A last will and testament, or commonly referred to as a will direct the distribution of all your assets that don't have a beneficiary designation. Any assets that you have that have a beneficiary designation will pass outside of your will. Common examples are life insurance or retirement accounts. For example, let's say you name your brother as the beneficiary on your IRA, but you name your spouse as the beneficiary in your will. In that case, that IRA will go to your brother, and the rest of your assets without a beneficiary, like your house or checking account, generally will go to your spouse. When you have a minor child, you can create a testamentary trust in your will, which is a trust created on death and restricts access to these assets to a predetermined age. I'm not sure about you, but 21-year-old Greg was not the best decision maker. Having your minor children inherit your money without a testamentary trust will allow them to have access to those assets at the age of the majority, which, depending on your state, is between 18 or 21 years old. In addition to a testamentary trust, you can appoint guardians to care for your child in case of a premature death. Without this provision, the courts will determine who will take care of your children instead of you. A living will gives you instructions on health care directives if you're incapacitated. This not only ensures your wishes are honored, but more importantly, takes that burden off your loved ones who are already going through a rough time at that point. My father did not have any health care directives, and my family had to sit in a room at UPMC Shadyside and essentially decide whether or not to let him go. That's a situation you don't want to put your loved ones in. The power of attorney document, also commonly referred to as a POA, is an important document that gives health care and financial decision-making to another individual if you are unable to do so. Spouses do not have this ability without this document. Again, with my father, he did not have a power of attorney in place, so my mother had trouble accessing money she needed to keep his business running while he was incapacitated. These documents are extremely important, but we often put off doing them. Not having them in place can cause a major disruption to your plan. The last concept we need to cover in our basic financial topics is to pay yourself first. In other words, prioritize your savings or putting money away systematically from each pay to ensure you're saving before you're spending. This concept will help you in two ways. First, it will allow you to systematically save in your investment vehicle, which could allow you to take advantage of downturns in your investments by investing when things are low because of the systemization that you've put in place with your investments. Please understand, systematic investment plans do not ensure a profit nor guarantee against the loss. Investors should consider their financial ability to continue their purchases through periods of low price levels. Second, it stops you from spending what you have planned on saving, which is shown to increase savings over time. When you build out your plan, make sure you pay yourself first. These are just a few of the basics. I could spend hours educating you on financial topics, but I wanted to cover the ones that I felt are the most important to getting you started. Now that we have the basic education down, it's time to look at the assumptions you will need to make as you build your plan in the next class.